Okay, let's go. Saren, thanks for coming on the Vantage Point podcast. Now, I've seen your page, Hedgerow Healing. It's got crazy traction on the clips you've been sharing. And why do you think it is that so many people so quickly have sort of connected with the things you've been posting? And also for listeners who maybe haven't seen your page, how would you describe what you post?
During lockdown, the first lockdown, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have a job. I had this love and this fascination for nature, something that I've been raised in and taught about for years. So I made this page, Hedgerow Healing, where I discuss the healing powers, the properties, the magic and mysticism surrounding plants and trees of the British Isles. Um, and then I stopped it for a while. I started running my own art workshops and focusing on a career. And I've recently started it back up again, where I have changed it slightly, where I talk a lot more about Celtic spirituality, folklore, and mysticism, um, about various, again, trying to relate it to nature in some way, um, because the Celts obviously did, and they revered nature above all. And my posts are generally just try to be informative. I mean, they're usually what I end up talking to someone's ear off at a pub about anyway. So I'll be really, really drunk somewhere in the sun and I'll start spewing anything about the healing powers of the oak tree or, where the word druid comes from, for example. And it got to the point where my friends just went, please just make an Instagram page and put these up as reels. Um, the traction for it is absolutely crazy. I did not expect this much exposure in such a short amount of time. Um, and I have no idea where it came from, really. I think just one reel absolutely popped off, and it's like the domino effect, isn't it? When one falls, the rest goes. And I just
Yeah.
woke up one day and one reel has had almost 400,000 views.
Well,
I've grown by like 14,000 followers in 5 days. Crazy, crazy numbers. Um, and I don't really know where it came from. I think it resonates with people because since COVID, when everyone had to sort of stay locked in their rooms and they reevaluated their lives, where they lived, people decided to return to nature. So a lot of people left the cities. A lot of people saw the value in forest schooling for educational purposes. A lot of people started to grow their own food and return to old ways of living and understanding of the land. And I think it's that really resonates with people. Um, and this appreciation of the natural world is something that we have lost, and this interconnectedness that we feel with it has definitely been lost over time. So, yeah, I think that's my answer.
yeah. Do you think that people maybe appreciated the things they wouldn't usually have appreciated when they're so busy caught up in their work lives, and then the COVID and the lockdowns gave us that kind of break to almost be forced to appreciate those things that around your home, places you might go for a walk, places maybe you didn't go for a walk when you were so busy with work. And then that was a kind of bit of a reset that maybe a lot of people needed. I certainly felt that. I started going down to the beach every day, doing my training out in the sun. Usually I'd be in a sweaty gym, but for that time I was forced to do my training outside, otherwise it wouldn't have got done. And it was a breath of fresh air, literally. And I think a lot of people needed that reset. Would you agree?
I completely agree. I feel that without the stresses of modern life, without needing to wake up, get the kids up at 6 a.m., go to do their work, travel an hour to work, travel an hour back, make dinner, all that other stuff, everyone finally stopped and was able to, as I said, reevaluate what was important and notice the small things around them. Like people discovered areas that they've never even found before. Personally, I've lived on this mountainside since I was 8 years old. I've discovered areas that I never knew existed, like ancient apple orchards, which are shrouded in bluebells in the spring. And it's incredible. And it definitely, it's one of those things, it's a controversial topic where people say COVID was the worst thing that happened to them, or it was either the best thing that happened to them. And obviously, it was a very stressful time for a lot of people, and a lot of people died. But ultimately, for the good of humanity, I think it was what we all needed, really. And a lot of people have kept that knowledge, kept that understanding, and taken it into their life now. So they either quit their jobs, they're doing something different, they're
Yeah.
making sure they have this connection to nature, or they've fallen back into old patterns. But it definitely did help massively. I think it's one of the reasons why my page has taken off so much.
In a way, it was a bit of a throwback to the past where we we have all these distractions now that are kind of thrust upon us, whether it's because of work or because of, the way we sort of typically structure sort of family life now. Whereas back in the day, you wouldn't have had distractions in the same way, especially not the distraction of your phone all the time, which I found myself taking breaks from looking at my phone just because the news was so depressing. I didn't really want to, so I ended up going for walks and stuff for that reason, and sticking a podcast on, learning some stuff. And I wanted to ask you this: do you think that you look into the past a lot for answers, but do you think that we've got rockets that can go to space, we've got the internet on our phones? Do you think this is the peak of our intelligence as the human species, or do you think that peak was somewhere in the past, and do you think there's information that's been kind of lost along the way?
It's definitely not the peak of our intelligence. I think we're continuously growing, continuously evolving, and I think there'll be generations which will be much smarter, much more advanced than us, as long as we don't burn the world down in the meantime.
But in the past though, do you think there was a past civilization that had things more figured out than we think that we do now?
I think that they had a connection, right? They understood a connection with the world, which we as a modern society don't, right? And so, for example, I just put up a video discussing how they revered trees above all, and how tree spirits resided in trees. Knocking upon a tree was, to ask the spirit for protection, for good luck, etc., etc. And that's really great. And then you look at scientific research where we actually understand how trees have their own language, how they talk to each other through their roots, how they can recognize their offspring. And it's amazing to think that back in the day, our ancestors had this feeling, this notion of something they couldn't quite put their finger on. They had no scientific understanding for it, but they knew it was there and they believed it to be true. And our society now, with all of our, science technology, we can like look into queries and determine whether yes, they're true, or no, they were just something that we had to put a understanding on. Because we didn't know that the sun would come up after winter, for example. So we sacrificed the lamb to the sun god, for example. Right. I definitely think they had their own form of intelligence. And I think each generation, each time period is intelligent in their own way, but they have this connectedness that we have certainly lost.
Yeah, I think that as well. And I see from what you talk about that, I kind of thought you might think the same way about that. And one thing that always sticks out to me is when I see these ancient buildings where they're perfectly aligned to where the sun hits the horizon on a summer solstice, and they had this understanding of the stars. But I've seen you talk in your post about how the solstices and the equinoxes are some sort of perhaps gateway into perhaps another plane of reality that we're not comprehending here. Talk to me about that.
The solstices and the equinoxes, if you just focus on the solstice, it's the shortest, for people who don't know, it's the summer solstice is the longest day and the shortest night, and the winter solstice is the polar opposite. It is the shortest day and the longest night. And over this period, the sun actually stands still for about 3 days. So it's this interesting time, this strange ethereal time, where apparently the doorway between our world and the other world is said to be thinnest. And that notion is kind of like repeated within the equinoxes as well. So Samhain and Beltane are the spring festivals, the height of spring and the height of autumn. So you'd know it today as Halloween. It's where Halloween originates from. So Halloween actually originated in burial chambers of Ireland, and it was a celebration of the dead and the spirits. And it was believed that the spirits would come back that day. So in old Irish tradition is to set an extra place at the table for family members that had died in recent years, as they believe that the spirits would be eaten with them. The reason why we dress up is actually a old Druidic thing, as far as we know from the texts that we have. As Druids would meditate, and they'd kind of create divinations at these burial chambers and these sacred sites. So they dressed up as otherworldly spirits. So if there was any bad spirits that were about that time, they would think they were one of them and would leave them alone. So it's really interesting, these ancient concepts that have repeated themselves and found their way into modern society. But the concept of an otherworld isn't just repeated in Celtic folklore and mythology, but it's across the world. You know, it's in every single culture. This understanding that it's not just humans that live on this earth, that there is something else out there, that there is like fae, there is spirits, there is. I'm outside, so the jackdaws in the chimney are quite loud, by the way. Yeah,
That's
there
okay.
is
It's not
fae
picking
there.
up.
Okay, good. And yeah, and at these points, the doorway between our other world is thinner, so you can connect to them. And there's many different neo-pagan traditions, such as um, going to watch the sunrise, right? So obviously Stonehenge is a world-renowned site. Everyone goes there in the summer solstice. The winter solstice less so because it's either raining or cold, and no one can be bothered with that. We sit inside and watch the fire. But when you think to the fact that our ancestors have been doing that for thousands and thousands of years, okay, and when you go to a place in the sacred site, you have this energy, this sense of feeling, and you can connect it to this sense of, okay, it could be the other world, it could be this barrier that we feel I could be breaking through, or it could be the fact that you're feeling this atmosphere, this energy that has been gathered for so many years of thousands of people celebrating on that exact same spot. Where back in the day there could have been sacrifices, there could have been, loads of rituals and ceremonies that a lot that we can't get away with today, such as, as I say, sacrifices. But what you're probably picking up is the atmosphere of these spaces, and I think that adds to this whole intricate feeling. And I think that partly plays with the Celtic Otherworld. But the Celtic Otherworld is interesting in the sense that it's not just like fairyland. It is very, how do I put this? It's very dangerous and dodgy, and you have to be careful. And if you get whisked away by the fairies, you might not come back. And there are many different stories that I can go into, such as, don't go into fairy rings, which is rings of mushrooms. Don't go out wandering on different times of the year. So another tradition of the solstice is to carry like a sprig, like a sacred sprig of an oak tree or something, if you're traveling at nighttime. Again, because you could be succumbed to evil fae or spirits on that night. It's quite a big question, and it's one of those things that, again, because the Celts didn't really write anything down. If they did, it was burnt or destroyed. We can only speculate on through traditions and anything that's passed down over time or written by the Romans. So
Right.
Yeah.
Does that make that makes that's a fascinating, and it really interests me, the idea that there's energies or potential planes of reality that we can't perceive with our small amount of senses that we have, and potentially they're there, we just can't really access them, or we're not really meant to access them yet, maybe. And one thing I did learn from watching a few of your videos is that the Celtic belief is that there were three different worlds, which I've got written down here. They were the celestial, the spiritual, and the physical planes. Could you describe what those are, and what are the differences between them? And do you subscribe to this belief that there are these three different realms? I don't know if you'd call them that.
Realms, I think, is a perfect word to describe them.
Right.
I mean, in Norse mythology, there were worlds. So you've got Yggdrasil, for example, and you've got their various worlds, Midgard and everything. And for the Celts, it was Annwn, Abred, and Gwynfed. So Welsh language, as far as we know. And the oak tree is said to represent this. So you have the root, which represents the physical realm, the mortal realm. You have the trunk, which then represents the kind of like the spirit realm. Okay, physical is obviously our realm, right? That's easiest to start with, right? It's the world that we live on. It's what we see around us. It's if you feel like you're in reality, it's probably the physical realm. The spiritual realm is, as it says, the world of spirits. So in there you've probably got where your fae and everything resides. So in that you have like the fairies, you'll have like various different kind of like spirits of trees, of plants, of humans, of animals. So Annwn, that was the world of fae. And there's a fairy king who's very famous for having hounds. And there's a really interesting story actually called The Hounds of Annwn. And it's discussing how he whisked someone away into the world of fae. It's really lovely, actually, Welsh folklore. And then So you have the celestial realm. Now, celestial realm, I haven't done too much research in at the moment, but I guess it is out of mind. So you've got mind, body, and spirit, essentially. And it's probably this place that the druids and anyone, witches and anyone else who did divinations and rituals, thought they went to during these rituals. So when you're sat down in meditations and divinations at various times of year, you go into the celestial realm. As far as I understand it, but again, everyone has their own knowledge. So the other world, Anun, is another kind of physical realm, which is the land of the faith. And then you've got our physical realm, and then you have the celestial, which I think is where your mind goes. And again, this has almost been proven with astral projection. If you look at various accounts and scientific research, there's been quite a lot done into it, including lots to do with the CIA and various different studies that they did onto astral projection, and how during meditation, and lots of teachers will actually tell you this, that you can feel like your mind goes somewhere else, but your body is in the same place. And I think that's kind of understanding of the celestial realm. It's very hard to put it into a few sentences at the moment.
Yeah,
because it's different to everyone. It's different to each person, and each individual will have their own connection with each different realm. Like how you view the world and how you view yourself and how you view just the land around you. Everyone has their own different perception of it. So
yeah,
that was mine.
Yeah, I guess everyone would, in theory, everyone would perceive it differently, wouldn't they? So say you were able to, potentially project yourself or be taken into one of these realms, then everyone would have a totally different experience of it. So you'd never really get a concrete idea of what it actually is. So, perhaps people before us, our ancestors, maybe had some way of being more connected to potentially another realm, but their experience might be different to another population of people's experience. So I guess until we get there, we can't know.
No, exactly. And we can only practice certain rituals and ceremonies that we think that they did, and practice it in ways that we think they did. So, for example, when druids would use divination at various times of year, they'd actually use dried rowan berries and chuck them into the fire. It was a form of incense. So it would help them get into these, meditative states. And again, cultures around the world, you have, the Native Americans and their shamanistic practices. You have cultures all across India who just use like meditation and divination to connect with their version of the other world, with the realm of the spirits. And in Norse mythology, it's actually very interesting because for them, their gods actually walked among them. They were real, they were living, they just lived in a different realm. So again, every culture has their own perception of it. And you're right, until we get there, we can't really tell, or you can't really know. But it's interesting to see how people who aren't even really connected to this side of life. I was raised in this. I was taught from a very young age, taught all about nature, living outdoors. It was great. I loved it. But I was, being brought to festivals, being brought to summer solstice gatherings. And my partner, he wasn't so much. So we'd go to Avebury Stone Circle at one point, and I was in my element, and I was walking through the avenue, and I was just having a great time, and I was really feeling the atmosphere, almost hearing the sound of drums, actually, which was quite special. And he's not quite into the whole mysticism side of things as I am. So he just had his hands up on stones. And he turned to me afterwards, and he was quite far back. And I turned around, I got to the end of the avenue, I turned around, and he was still quite far back. So I sat down, I meditated under a stone, I waited for him. And he turned to me and he went, I put my hand on a stone, and for some reason I just felt like this really intense atmosphere, like it was covered in blood or something. And it really kind of shook me. And I went, wow, you probably had this interesting connection. You probably tapped into either something ancient, to another world. You tapped into something for sure. So even people who don't practice that much or haven't been raised in this culture can still be a part of it. And I think it's in our human nature and in our mind and body and soul to actually want to return to nature and return to the world and return to this ancient way of life, this more ritualistic way where we actually feel at one with the world around us instead of separate from it. So what you said earlier about, being on your phone so much, I mean, I found this to be totally true, especially with trying to start my Instagram at the moment. I've just found myself on my phone so much more and actually disconnecting from the world around me, which is not what I like to do. So I've been throwing my phone in the corner, switching it off, and that's great. And it really has allowed me to reconnect. Walking outside barefoot, that's another great way. You don't have
Yeah,
to
grounding.
wear a mask, chuck berries in a fire, and meditate at a specific time. You can literally just walk outside barefoot and feel that connection with the earth.
Okay, you use that as an example, but I wonder what are some of the rituals that you do then personally, when no one's about, what would you do to try and perhaps connect more? And what do the rituals that you do, what is the significance for you? What do you hope to get out of it?
If I'm feeling overwhelmed or stressed out or feeling like I need a return to my roots, I will create a ritual. I will sit outside. I'll something as simple as just getting the fire going, the outside fire, and sitting around that and playing Celtic music or um just listening to the sound of the crackling fire. That in itself is a ritual. Fire is one of our oldest elements. It's amazing. Humans have been gathering around it since prehistory. So that's kind of like a basic ritual that I will do. If it was around the solstice or an equinox, we tend to have large gatherings. So again, that's tapping into ancient cultures who would have had large gatherings. Essentially, the Celts would get bored every month and a half and need an excuse for a big piss up somewhere. So they'd gather around a fire, they'd drink lots of mead, lots of cider, lots of other homebrewed God knows what, and celebrate with their friends or family. Each festival in the Wheel of the
Sounds
Year
pretty
has a
good.
different. It is. It's really nice actually. The winter festivals can get a bit hard, so you celebrate inside. But in the summer, it's amazing, and it forces you to get outside instead of at 10 o'clock at night when it's getting slightly dark and it's getting cooler. And everyone goes, oh, I'm just going to sit on the couch, I'll put the TV on, I'll go on my phone. Get outside, light a fire, be around your friends and family. Um, I think rituals in the simplest form are the best, really. If I wanted to do a more divination, so if it's a specific time of year, like near the autumn equinox, and I want to tap into root energy and kind of connect back to myself a little bit more and reflect on the summer and the year past, I will, set up my altar with all like precious stones and bits of dried herbs I've collected over the summer. I maybe journal. I'll maybe try and figure out what I want to do, what I want to gain. I'll maybe reflect and read up about the actual specific festival, um, and gain some insightful knowledge about that, and then go into a deep sense of meditation. So, like a divination, like a ritual, and you can do that, in your room. You can do that underneath trees. It's great to do it underneath trees actually, to really connect with the energy of the land that's around you. And I think it's really important to be able to and to be able to hold space for yourself as well.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier your partner had an experience where he touched a stone and had a sort of feeling like something was happening that no one else could probably see happening around. Have you ever had an experience like that that has meant something to you or that you've maybe learned something from?
Personally, like he had, no, and it was really interesting to hear actually. And but he's the kind of person that doesn't really want to deeply think about it. He'll just go, oh, okay, that happens, and move on with the day. Whereas I'll fixate and I'll go, no, 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 I want to understand. Let's try and figure this out. Let's write about it. Let's learn about it a little bit more. But no, I think it was a really interesting experience. I think the wherever he was really wanted to show him something and just kind of went, no, you should go down this path. We think you'd be good at it. But how about you?
Yeah.
Have you ever had anything similar?
Um, I can't say I have, or nothing that at least my cynical brain couldn't just explain away. I'd like to say I've had a one standout experience where I thought, oh, that was definitely something otherworldly. But yeah, unfortunately not yet. But I'd be open to it. I wouldn't try and shut it down if I did experience something like that. And yeah, I mean, I hope I do one day. And I guess what I'm trying to do with this and what I'm trying to do sort of, just in my own time is learn stuff and try and understand some of these things that I find mysterious right now, but hopefully one day will make a lot more sense to me. What time was it when you thought maybe there's something bigger at work here? You said you were brought up with these traditions and these beliefs, but for you personally, you can't just be brought up with it. There must be something that makes you strongly believe that like this is the way, as opposed to all the other kind of religious practices there are that you could subscribe to.
Well, there's many different things actually. The first and most obvious one is the connection to nature and the natural world. The second is that there's no written book telling you what to do and how to practice. You have these interesting guidelines and a mild understanding of what we used to do in ceremonies and rituals, and that's great. And I love to go by that. And instead of a standard church, which tells you what to do every step of the way. Another thing is how women are equal. That's very important in pagan cultures. So goddesses were equally as powerful as gods. Women were just highly thought of equally as powerful. They were able to conduct ceremonies. They were able to be healers. They weren't, persecuted, as we saw later on for various different religions. And I think that's incredibly special in a time where, women really need to kind of gain back their strength and a sense of who they are and a sense of independence and belonging. Looking at pagan traditions, even if you don't necessarily believe in such things as spirits of trees, but look at how they treated, women, men, children, all as equals is fascinating. And very, very, very important, I think, especially in modern society. And they're my three majors. They're like the three major things. There's a lot of freedom involved in pagan practices. And there is a lot of, how do I put it? Connecting with your ancient culture, which I think is very important for a sense of belonging, because we feel so out of place in modern world. As we've talked about, phones, technology, it's a lot, and there are so many people everywhere all the time that you can feel really out of your own body and mind. It offers a sense of grounding that you're not able to just get in modern society, and by doing that you gain a sense of where you've come from, where you're going, where you belong. And you understand more about your person, your ancestors, and who you are. And it's just a very ancient, ritualistic, some would say religion. I'd call them traditions, and ways of life, really, because it was a way of life. It wasn't really thought of as a religion. It's just what you did and how you lived, how you saw the sunrise in at specific times of the year, or how you would celebrate from killing an animal, how you would like connect with a tribe in a sense of community. And it does offer us this amazing community, this amazing into a community that a lot of us have lost. Again, you go back to everyone just individual, they're just focused on their phones, work, career, themselves, and they don't stop and they don't talk to people. They don't go and chill with their neighbors, or they don't go and barter with their neighbors for eggs and bacon, for example. There's no trade, there's no connection in communities anymore.
What's like a folklore tale perhaps with a message that people of our era now would benefit from hearing, or perhaps a lesson you've learned that people right now would benefit from?
A lesson that people will benefit from is essentially what every single folk tale or mythology has, like the base of every folk tale mythology is connect to your natural world, connect to your natural environment and respect it, and once you respect it, as I say, even if you don't see a plant or a tree as necessarily having their own spirit or god or deity, just understand that we are part of nature. We're all interconnected with the natural world and we're not separate from it. So treat it with respect, understand the healing powers that nature can have, both medicinally and physically, and learn about it, and from there you gain a sense of belonging and understanding of your own culture. And this is true for not just people of Ireland and Wales and Scotland and England, but all over the world. Connect with your natural environment, connect with your old ways of life and living, and you will actually start to feel better mentally and physically.
I think that's a great point to end on. Saren, thanks so much for coming on Vantage Point.
It's been lovely to chat to you, Glen.